The Truth of the Matter with Pastor Austin Deloach Jr. The Truth of the Matter is brought to you by Truth Point Ministries of Lakeland, Georgia.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in today to The Truth of the Matter on YouTube. We are in a long series, been in this series for several months from the book of Nehemiah, and it really is timely for our ministry as we are looking at the vision of building Truth Point out here on Highway 221 in Lakeland, and God is doing so much. In the very near future, we'll be constructing a 100-foot cross along with a prayer chapel. After that, a ministry and marriage retreat center along with a brand new worship center right here for Truth Point. So we're so excited, but this series of messages is all about godly vision, how God provides both the vision and the provision for whatever it is He places in your heart to do. And so I hope that this series of messages has been a blessing to you, and we want to thank you again for tuning in. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so that anytime anything drops on our channel, you'll be notified. Thank you again for tuning in. God bless. This is one of those little verses that if you're trying to speed read the Bible, you just read by it. And it's one of those verses that it doesn't seem to say much, but it says more than you can possibly imagine. In fact, let's look at it. Look what it says in chapter 13, verse 6. It says, "But during all of this, I was not in Jerusalem." Who was not in Jerusalem? Nehemiah. Nehemiah's been there for this project. He's been overseeing, he's been correcting, he's been building, he's been leading the people to put a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. He's been leading them through all of this difficulty. Now he says, I left Jerusalem. Why did he leave Jerusalem? It says, "For in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I returned back to the king, and then after certain days I obtained leave from the king." So here's what happens in that little verse. Nehemiah just slides it in there. He says, I've been here all this time. You remember he requested leave in the first few chapters. He goes there, he gets the wall completed, but now it's time for him to take a trip back to Shushan. So he gets back to Shushan, and the scripture says he's there for a little while, and then he requests to go back to Jerusalem again. Now here's the question. How long was he gone? Y'all ready for this? I don't know, and you don't either. And listen, and anyone who says they do know, they don't. That we don't know. I don't even have any idea why most of the people that I read said this, but most people think he was probably gone for about a year, roughly a year. Now, here's the question. What happens when Nehemiah, the leader of all of the rebuilding of the wall, what happens when the leader picks up and leaves and he's gone in his absence? Let me say this. It shouldn't be this way. There should have been people left there, under shepherds. They should have been there, but when he leaves, something happens. Notice what happens here in Jerusalem's decline. We'll just look at two of this. This will lead into the next points. But if you go back to chapter 10, some of you were here for this part of the study, but when you go back to chapter 10, it says, the rest of the people, the priests, the Levites, gatekeepers, singers, Nethinim, all these leaders, and all those who had separated themselves from the people of the land to the law of God, their wives, their sons, and their daughters, everyone who had knowledge and understanding. So they brought, back in this message that I did, they had brought all of the leaders together, all the people together. But look what they did in verse 29. It says, they joined with their brethren, their nobles, and they entered into a curse and an oath. Now, some of you remember that. They entered into that covenant with God, and they said, God, if we don't do these things, we're going to enter into a curse with you. Now, if y'all remember, I told you this. Don't do this. I don't encourage anyone in here to do this. I don't encourage anybody in this room to say to God, God, I promise you this, and if I don't do it, kill me. This is what they're saying. The problem is that this oath didn't last 3 chapters. And I'll show you how it didn't last. And go to the next screen, if you will, and I promise we're going to get to the truth points in just a moment, but this will make it real clear. See how I lined this out so you can see it, Nehemiah 10, Nehemiah 10, Nehemiah 10, and then 13. In Nehemiah 10, they made these 3 promises to the Lord. Look at verse 39 real quickly. It says this. Back in chapter 10, here's what they said. They said, the children of Israel and the children of Levi shall bring the offering of the grain, the new wine, the oil, to the storerooms where the articles of the sanctuary are. Stop right there. Here's all that they're doing. They made a promise to God. They said, we are going to bring the offerings we're supposed to bring to the temple of God. Fast forward to chapter 13. Nehemiah gets back to Jerusalem, and look what he says. He says, I also, when I got back, realized that the portions for the Levites had not been given to them. So in 3 short chapters, they've broken their promise. Now go to the next one real quickly. In Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 31, they were making these promises. Here's what they said. They said, if the peoples of the land brought wares or any grain to sell on the Sabbath day, we would not buy it from them on the Sabbath. So stop right there. Here's the promise they made. They said, Lord, we are going to observe the Sabbath as you've told us to. There's going to be no work done on the Sabbath. We're not going to do business on the Sabbath. All we're going to do is we're going to rest on the Sabbath and obey your law. Now, fast forward with me real quickly. Don't miss any of this. I know it's a little bit redundant, but fast forward. It says this in Nehemiah 13. In those days, Nehemiah said, I saw people in Judah treading wine presses on the Sabbath, bringing in sheaves, loading donkeys with wine, grapes, figs, and all kind of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, and I warned them. And if you were to read the rest of that, he rebukes them for breaking that word on the Sabbath. Now I have one more. Just stay with this. Nehemiah 10:30. Here was a promise they made in Nehemiah 10. Here's what they said. They said, we will not give our daughters as wives to the people of the land, nor will we take their daughters as for our sons. So here's what it says. They said, we make a promise. We will not intermingle with the other nations of the world. We will not give our daughters to them. Don't make more than this than he's saying. What he's saying is this. We will not allow our daughters to marry sons who worship another God. This was all about the God that they worshiped. It's the same thing that we see in the New Testament. To not be unequally yoked with an unbeliever. Now the scripture's very clear about this. The problem is that when they get to this particular point, Nehemiah gets to chapter 13, look what happens. In those days, I also saw the Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Now, if you will, just fix your eyes on the word Ammon. Fix your eyes on it. These were the sworn enemies of God. I mean, they're the sworn enemies of God. They hated the Jews. You know, on a day like this, after all that's happening in the world right now, we shouldn't find it hard to believe that this city that now is in Jordan, Amman, Jordan, that these people despised the Jews. And I'm going to get to that in just a moment, because you're going to see something very interesting that happens with an Ammonite. That means someone who is a descendant of Ammon. Of course, you may know this already. If you do, that's great. Many people may not. The Ammonites were descendants of Lot, who was Abraham's nephew. And they actually ended up tribing in Jordan. And they vehemently hated the Jewish people. Now that's going to be very important in the message in just a few moments. Now, if you will, let's go real quickly to the truth points, and all of this, hopefully be able to tie all this together. When you look at chapters 12 and 13, what do we learn? Here's what we learn. First thing we learn. We learn that the wall was completed and celebrated, but the desire of the enemy remained. That is so important. The wall was completed and celebrated. In other words, this was a high moment in Israel. We love high moments, but be careful of high moments. Be careful of celebrations. Whenever we celebrate all that God is doing, it seems like the enemy is always lurking. Here's what we can think. We can think, well, because we've celebrated this victory, and God has done so much in our life, in our church, in our family, whatever it might be, we can think now we're exempt from the enemy. Let me help you with this. You're not exempt from the enemy in that moment. You actually become his target. The more God is doing in and through you, the more you become a very specific target of the enemy. If you'll stay with me in this, I give you my word. This will be as interesting as you ever see in Scripture of how this happens. See Tobiah the Ammonite, we've known him since the beginning of the book. You may not remember it because this has been a long study, but we were introduced to Tobiah early on. And what makes this interesting now is that he was an Ammonite. Now, who were the Ammonites? Look real quickly again at Deuteronomy. It says, an Ammonite or a Moabite, this is a command that's given by Moses to the people of Israel. An Ammonite or a Moabite shall not enter the assembly of the Lord. Even to the 10th generation, none of his descendants shall enter the assembly of the Lord forever, because they did not meet you with bread and water and the rest of that. But listen to what he's saying here. He's saying, no matter how long Israel exists, he said, you are not to let an Ammonite or a Moabite into any kind of assembly that the Jews are putting together. The temple, wherever it might be, you're never to welcome an Ammonite or a Moabite. Now here's what happens in this story. Look at Nehemiah chapter number 10. Tobiah, remember him way back in chapter 2. It says Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite, they heard about them building the wall. And it says they were deeply disturbed that a man had come to seek the well-being of the children of Israel. So you see early on, Tobiah was against the wall. But look what happens next. In chapter 4, verse 3, it says Tobiah, same guy, the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, whatever they build, if even a fox goes up on it, he'll break down their stone wall. Some of you remember that. We studied that a long time ago, where they were trying to demean the Jewish people. They were telling them, you can't build a wall, and if you do build a wall, it'll be so unstable that if a fox jumps up on it, the wall will fall down. So this is Tobiah. We're going somewhere. Look at the next part real quickly. In chapter 6, verse 19, it says that Tobiah earlier sent letters so that he might frighten Nehemiah. You know why he wanted to frighten him, don't you? Because fear always paralyzes you. There are people in this room right now, and you're paralyzed in your walk with Christ because you're scared. You're afraid. You're afraid to make the next move. And because of that, fear has set in and paralysis has set in. So here's why that's so important. When you get to Nehemiah chapter 13, verses 4 and 5, notice what happens. Nehemiah says, Elisha, the priest, having authority over the storerooms of the house of our God, the temple, was allied with Tobiah, the Ammonite. He had prepared for him a large room where previously they had stored grain offerings. So stop right there. Tobiah is now made his way into the temple. This Ammonite, who's not even supposed to be around the Jewish people, he now has an office inside the temple. Think about this. He's been the very one who's been trying to destroy the work. Now he has an office in the headquarters. He's on the inside. See, listen to me. I'm not afraid. We have enemies, trust me. I found out about new ones every week. Found about some new ones this past week. It's crazy. What people say about us, it's crazy. Some of the rumors that get out there. We have enemies. It's not the enemies on the outside that bother me as much as it is when we have enemies on the inside. But here's something to remember. Tobiah did not get in through might. He got in through manipulation. He manipulated his way in on the inside so that he could destroy the nation now, not from the outside in, but from the inside out. Did you know that this happens all of the time? This can happen in families. This can happen in businesses. This certainly can happen in churches. I'm going to show you in just a minute how we are warned over and over again about letting people in on the inside. Notice what it says in 2 Corinthians 11, 13 through 15. Here's Paul's dealing with false apostles. Look what he says. He says, for such are false apostles, deceitful workers. They transform themselves into apostles of Christ. In other words, here's the point Paul's fixing to make. He's saying these people are trying to infiltrate the church in 2 Corinthians. And he said, here's what they're not doing. So everybody watch this. What they're not doing is they're not walking through the front door with a red jumpsuit on and a pitchfork in their hand and a forked tail and saying, the devil's here. No, you know what they look like? They look like you. Not you specifically. But they look like us. They come in as an angel of light. They disguise themselves. Look at the words that are used here. It says this, and no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. He never wants you to see him for who he is. He doesn't want to come showing you all of what he really is. So he disguises himself as an angel of light. Therefore, it's no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves. See what he's saying there? He's saying, look, the devil doesn't come in like that. And he says, neither do his people. Neither do his people. Said his people get really good at camouflaging. In fact, a good word is stealth. And if you'll notice what Galatians says, whenever they start trying to move into Galatians, in Galatians 2:4, it says, Paul writes and says, and this occurred because of false brethren secretly brought in, look at this, who came in by stealth. That ought to ring a bell with us this morning. Stealth, what does it mean? They fly in unseen, drop their bomb, and you're destroyed before you even knew they were there. He's saying that's what these enemies do. They come in, they fly under the radar, and they come in stealth, and they come in to destroy. And this is what Tobiah's done. You say, well, Brother Austin, what does that have to do with me? It has everything to do with you. For some of us, you better get on high alert. You better this morning ask God for discernment. Oh, God, give me discernment. Because the enemy, for some of you who are getting real serious about your walk with Christ, the enemy's doing everything he can to slide into that family. He's doing everything. He hears everything you announce this morning about this church. He's going to hear everything we talk about at 5 o'clock this afternoon. He knows that this church is serious about going to the nations of the world to build disciples. You better believe we better be praying for discernment in this place. The enemy would love to come in stealth and come in to destroy everything God is doing in your life. Number 2, quickly. Not only that, but the second thing we see is that there's no indication in the entire book that Nehemiah was spiritually drifted or compromised. None. Here's what we do see. We see everyone else drifting, coming back, making promises, drifting. But never do we see Nehemiah drift. Nehemiah stays on track. He never drifts. I said this in the outset because I didn't want to forget to say it when I got to this point. Here's part of the problem we have with people who are hot and cold, up and down. You know, they come in and they burn hot for 5 Sundays, and then after that, y'all have heard me say it before, the CIA can't find them. I mean, nobody can find them. And it's up and down, and for many people, don't miss this, their whole Christian life is like that. Their whole Christian life, if it's decades, they never get on a trajectory of where they have a consistent walk with Christ. Again, I'm not preaching perfection. I'm talking about consistency. And I'm not saying that it's always church, but church certainly is an indicator. And so whenever we find people who are really making a difference for Christ, it's those people who have gotten on a trajectory of consistency in their walk with the Lord. I would encourage you to do that today. You'd be blown away at what God would do in your life if you just would put together years of dedication, total dedication to Christ, putting Christ first in your life and not up and down and all around. And you say, Brother Austin, why does this happen? Why is there drift? This is not complicated, and I'm certainly not saying I'm smart, but the issue's not complicated. We drift because we lose focus. We lose focus. What we focus on, remember I said this several weeks ago, focus determines direction, not pace, but your focus in life determines which way you're going. And for many people, here's what the enemy knows. The enemy knows that focus is a key to the Christian life, so guess what he masters in? Distraction. He masters in distraction. He understands just what to put in front of us. You know what it is? It's not always sin. I know we think that it's not always sin that does this. Sometimes it's things that are good. Sometimes things that are wholesome. But we allow those things to come in that begin to distract us from Christ. And so as a result of that, we begin to drift. And I've said this 1,000 times from this pulpit. You never drift to good places. No one in this room. Once you go into drift mode in your marriage, once you go into drift mode in your Christian life, you inevitably are going to drift to bad places. You don't ever drift to good places. You know, Nehemiah was involved in a worldly project. Building a wall. Some of you in here, you're involved in building a business, building church, we're going to be building buildings. But don't ever separate the spiritual from the natural. Never. You remember the prayer that Jesus taught the disciples to pray, Our Father which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Remember what he said? On earth as it is in heaven. What Jesus was saying is this. Jesus was saying prayer ties heaven to earth. Prayer gets heaven involved on what happens on earth. It's the greatest privilege God has given to us. And when you open up the book of Nehemiah, chapter 1, verse number 4 and 5, look how the chapter begins. We're not going to look at all of those, but look at this one. It says, so it was, Nehemiah says all the way back in chapter 1, when I heard these words, I sat down and I wept and I mourned for many days, and I was fasting and I was praying. See that? He's fasting and he's praying. Now go back to the outline. He starts in prayer, and you can see all through here he's praying. Now go to Nehemiah 13:31, if y'all will, real quickly. Nehemiah 13:31, last verse of the book. This is the very last verse of the book. It says, in bringing the wood offering to the first fruits at the appointed time. And then see where it says, remember me, O my God, for good. That's the end of the book. So at the very beginning of the book, Nehemiah is praying. The very last verse of the book, Nehemiah is praying. And if you were to take Google, and you can do this, it's not a sin to Google this. Take Google and ask your Google, how many times did Nehemiah pray in the book of Nehemiah? You're going to be blown away. He prayed and he prayed and he just kept on praying. And yeah, he worked with his hands and he did all these things, but here's what he really did. He was constantly talking to the Lord. He was constantly praying. He knew the secret to success for anybody in this room is that you need to learn how to pray. You say, Brother Austin, that's so simple, is it? Well, let's look at one last verse. Look at Luke chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. It says, we're in the Gospels now, and it says, it came to pass as Jesus was praying in a certain place, as he always was, he ceased praying, and one of his disciples came to him and said, Lord, teach us to what? Pray. Now here's what we know about Jesus. Jesus could heal anybody. He could preach and teach with the best, better than anyone. He preached and he healed and he did all of these things. See, I, as a preacher, I would have been tempted to say, Jesus, teach me how to preach. Teach me how to teach the word. I'd be interested in that. Or Jesus, teach me how to heal. But here's what they said. They said this. They said, what we see is we see him praying and something's different. They said when he prays and when he gets done praying, they said that that's what we want for him to teach us how to do. We want for him to teach us how to get hold of the horns of the altar, as the Old Testament says. And we want for Jesus to teach us how to come into the throne room of God and to petition God. Jesus, teach us to pray. Let me ask you a question. Has anyone in this room ever asked God to teach you how to pray? Have you ever said to the Lord from your heart, have you said, God, the one thing I want to ask you to do, I want to ask you how to help me petition the Father just like you did. And God, I want to see mountains thrown into oceans. And God, I want to see you do things in my life. I want to see you save my loved ones. God, I want to see you heal this person. God, I want to see you build this church and help us make disciples. Have you really learned how to pray? Because see, here's the thing. Some people in here, you're teaching your children how to shoot a basketball, how to throw a baseball, how to catch a football, how to catch a fish. Teach them how important it is to learn like the disciples did. Teach them how to learn from God, how to come before the Lord and to get results in prayer and to no longer carelessly loft empty words before God, repeated prayers that you've said them so often you can say them backward. But they no longer come from an effectual, fervent part of your heart where you're truly learning how to get hold of the Lord and how to pray and how to see results in your life. Man, listen, Nehemiah, you don't know why he completed a wall. I know a lot of people say, well, he was just a great leader, man. Brother Austin, he knew how to organize. Did you know there's some lost people who know how to organize? Brother Austin, he knew how to work, man. He was a worker. Unlike preachers, he was a worker. He knew how to work with his hands, Brother Austin. He knew what to do. Yeah, he knew how to work. It's more than that. More than that. It was more than his hands. It was more than his organizational skill. You want to find the secret to Nehemiah's success, all you have to do is read the whole book and look for the reoccurring theme. You no longer get done reading about it till you find Nehemiah's praying again. And he's praying again. And he's praying again. And he's offering these little short prayers to the Lord. I mean, just out of nowhere, just a little prayer. Remember me, Lord. And just learned how to pray. You know what I want to do this morning? I want to challenge everyone in this room. I want to challenge everybody in this room to pray this morning. You don't have to come to this altar. I'm not going to get anything out of that. The Lord might lead you to that. You might make an altar out of that pew that you're sitting in. But we all have something to pray about. I know I do. I have something burning that I want to quit right now just to get down there to pray about it. Because I can't do anything about it right now standing up preaching, but I know I can hand it to Him. Anybody in here have something you need to hand to the Lord? You got a wall. Do you have a wall that's impossible to build? And you can't build it apart from learning how to pray. Hey, look at our world. Tim wrote me last night and said, don't you think we need to pray for our world and what's going on? I said, absolutely. It's a great, my message is going to go great with it. As we end talking about prayer, I want you to pray for our president. Can you imagine making such consequential decisions? You make a decision and it affects lives, real lives. I mean, people are going to die. This is real stuff. If you were up there in that office, how many of you would want for somebody to be praying for, oh, God, give him wisdom. God, give him discernment. Don't let him be flippant. He's not flippant. But don't let him just flippantly do it. God, give him guidance in his heart. Surround him with people of wisdom, God, and discernment and faith. Why don't you pray for him this morning? Some of you have children. You know what? You have children you need to be praying for. Right now, this morning, not tomorrow. This is the most important thing you can learn to do, is to pray. Nehemiah started the book in prayer. He kept on praying. And the very last verse of the book is Nehemiah praying. He's trying to teach us something. He's trying to say it'll never happen apart from prayer. I felt like the Lord a few weeks ago, because I tend to worry sometime, as my children and wife would tell you. I tend to get a little upset and worried. I sensed that the Lord said to my heart a few weeks ago, son, you can't worry all this into existence. You can't worry it into existence. But you can pray and believe it into existence. And you can too. You can too this morning. You can get hold of him by faith. Pour out your heart before the Lord. It's one of the greatest privileges we have.